everyone, and welcome to another episode of She Slays the Day. I am your host, Lauren. Okay, so I just got off my final masterclass, week 8 call with my group, and I'm just buzzing with energy for those that are paying attention. Let's see. I started a masterclass, so I did a small group masterclass called Revive that we were taking people in May, and it started in June, and it was an 8-week course to work with people to help them just create their 2020, kind of recover from what's been going on, and all that, whatever. I'm doing a terrible job, but I'm not trying to sell it to you right now because you can't buy it right now. I'll do a better description if I ever need to sell it again. My point is that it was really a beautiful experience, and I'm just so grateful to the group of women that I got to be with for the last 8 weeks and that community, and I would really like to do it again. You will hear today in this question why I don't know exactly if or when I will do it again. For those paying attention, though, it started June. It said 8 weeks, and you're like, wait a minute, Lauren, let's see, it is like Sunday, August 2nd. Does that mean you're recording this on Friday, July 31st? Yes, I am. Why? 2 reasons. One, apparently I'm just sadistic to my husband and want him to have to edit like a maniac with a timeline. 2, I call myself multi-passionate. And what that means is, or ADHD, I mean, really, whatever, we don't need to label anything. But what it means is that when I am on a soapbox in life or something is truly affecting me, wherever it is, personally or professionally, I feel really motivated to talk to you guys about it. And I don't want to wait for 2 months from now when we have a next opening for an episode. I want it to be released in kind of like real time, Like if I'm struggling with drinking too much, I'm not saying I am, okay? Whatever, it was an example. And I do an interview with someone on how to not numb during this time. I don't want it to come out in September. I want it to come out right now because that's where I got the information and it was helpful. And I assume that if I'm going through it, you guys are going through it. So anyways, I told Kirby, no, I don't want to wait until the end of August. I want to budge this episode to the front because it's what I've gone through over the last few weeks. So anyways, without further ado, today's question is less a question. Well, I'll phrase it as a question from me, and it's on the idea of compassion fatigue. So before we jump in, we're going to do a listener highlight, because that's what we do here, people. Okay. So this is back from December, and it says a bomb-ass podcast for women. It says Dr. Lauryn nailed it by starting this podcast. She's extremely relatable, transparent, and answers the burning questions that so many female chiropractors have been dying to ask. Her podcast provides an outlet for women to ask vulnerable questions without judgment, and quite frankly, she brings guests on who have been there, done that, and designed a course for that. The content and advice provided is invaluable and life-changing. Keep rocking, Lauren. So thank you very much for that. That's a really kind review. I appreciate it. And yeah, definitely that, when I started the podcast, I didn't plan on it being as vulnerable as it ended up being. I mean, I planned on you being vulnerable. Let's get that straight. I wanted you to be vulnerable and me to help you and answer your questions. But I didn't realize how comfortable I would be being vulnerable with 1,000 people every week. And I am. And it happened really fast. I think like episode 10 is where it was like, okay, so I've had enough of being your fearless leader and am now ready to show you all of my flaws. And I kind of bring that up because today is another one of those things that I could have easily had an expert on the idea of compassion fatigue. I know people, right? I could have found a therapist. And I could have just done the thing of like, so tell me about compassion fatigue, Nancy. And I don't know why her name was Nancy. Her name's always Nancy, right? And I could have just been an interviewer, but like, I don't know. I just feel like we get so much more. The reason people like this podcast, I think, is because I go there with subjects that I think you're going there with too. And I let you in, not just after the fact, not just like, oh, so this is something that I was dealing with 6 months ago, but right now I'm totally great and perfect. And I don't want you to think that I suffered for like just a second and now I'm great. And I think that, in general, we do that with books. We do that with our gurus or because we don't like sitting in the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. So for some of you, so for me, it's more comfortable to talk to you about a subject after I'm already through it, right? Because I feel certain that I healed and recovered, and I don't have to, I can be a little vulnerable, but with the confidence that I was only broken for a minute. It's a lot different for me to talk to you guys about something while I'm struggling with it, because I don't have the certainty that I'm not going to stay broken. And so then I have to let you all in on like this journey of like, what if I'm just broken? What if I am not fine 6 months from now? What if this gets worse than currently? And that sucks. Like, that just sucks to be in individually, let alone include a bunch of other people. Also, I'm going to throw you guys under the bus just a tiny bit, of that people want certainty. So we seek certainty from others. So it's like, okay, so Lauryn, talk to me about compassion fatigue. Tell me what it is. Tell me what to do. And then tell me that you did it and it worked, and with certainty that this is what I need to do and I will be fixed. Right? So like, we don't buy a weight loss program from someone who's hasn't like gotten the results, crossed the finish line, right? We're like, because I want to know that what you're telling me is gonna work, and before I invest in it. And I don't know, I guess what I'll tell you is you're not paying me. So like, that's part of the reason I feel comfortable. I'm not selling you anything today. I am inviting you to coffee with me. And that's kind of what the point of this podcast is like, hey, let's have coffee and talk about stuff that I think a lot of us are going through. And if we're not going through it now, you might be going through it a month from now or 6 months from now, or your best friend might be going through it, or your daughter might be going through it. And let's just talk. So I said that today wasn't a question from anyone else. It's more just a vulnerable question from me, to me, of like, dear Lauryn, what the fuck is going on with you lately? You are not yourself. You're tired. You're cranky. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not being good. You're isolating from friends. You're not doing the things that usually bring you joy. What's up with that? So before we jump in, that would be my question to myself, I guess. So before we jump in, let us not forget to pray. Dear God, thank you so much for these people that trust me and want to have these conversations. Help my example, my experience, my words, my personality, whatever, everything that you have given to help them on their path and help them to see part of my story and how it can impact them, help them to have conversations and just be better versions of themselves. Thank you so much for experts on topics like this. Because Lord, you know, I was going to say Lord knows in my prayer, but like I'm talking to you, so you know that I am not an expert on this. So thank you for giving me the confidence to talk about things, even when, and not like hide and go like, oh, I can't talk about that. So thank you for that false sense of confidence that you always give me. I love you so much. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so before we jump into what's been going on the last 2 or 3 weeks in my life, I need to catch you up to speed a little bit. So where I am at is that we've had 2 associates. So we have 2 clinics, and I've had 2 associates for the last 3 years. I hired my first associate 6 years ago, 5 years. I should know the answer to that. 5 years ago, we'll say 5 to 6. And then I hired another one 2 years later. Opened a second clinic. Great. So I pictured that when, you know, we kind of got to this growth point in the clinic where we weren't, even though I had hired on the second associate, we still weren't growing in numbers wise. And, you know, I've done podcasts on the importance of executive time. I think that one of the biggest things as a visionary is to have time where you're working on your clinic, not in your clinic. So when we looked at the numbers, it was like, okay, realistically, I need to be adjusting, you know, I think we figured out like 15 hours a week to handle the certain load. So it wasn't like, so it was comfortable on the associates, but then I still had all this time to work on all the stuff I was going to work on. So that's been for the last 2 years where I worked 1 full day a week, and 3 other days I would only work from like 2 to 5:30, like in the clinic, adjusting. And I don't know, it really didn't do magic for our growth. That's not to say that executive time isn't what is good. Hindsight, I totally did not use that executive time purposefully. I started a podcast to talk to you guys and not make money. Instead of doing all the stuff I should have been doing, like meeting with local professionals and yada, yada, and yada, yada. Whatever. Well, that's a whole different podcast of how to productively use your executive time and not what I did for the last 2 years. So about the beginning of May, my first associate, who started with me right out of school, not me out of school, her out of school, and, you know, has blossomed into this amazing chiropractor who our patients love, absolutely love. I love, told me that her husband got a really good corporate job out in New Jersey and that it was the right move for them. And instantly when she told me, my brain, so like the first thing that happened was my heart clenched, or my breath clenched, and then my heart relaxed, because I can't tell you how I knew it was the right thing, because my brain did not want this. Like the second thing that happens is strategically I figure out all the ways that this is going to affect me. I'm a very selfish person. How it's going to affect my business, me. I went home later that day and told Kirby, and Kirby was like, oh my gosh, who's the job with? And I'm like, I don't know, I didn't ask. And he's like, oh my God, you didn't ask? And I was like, no. I instantly started thinking of what I needed to do to like make sure I and the business was going to be okay. And he just laughed at me. He's like, you're a terrible person. Anyway, so I clench, go, oh my God. And then there's this brief moment where my heart just knows, like, this is right. Like, this is going to sound super woo-woo, but like her contract and my contract, our earth contract of what not just she was here to do for me, but what I was here to do for her was complete. And I knew that this was the right next step, not just for her, but for the business. And then my mind took over of like, fuck, you're going to have to work a lot more. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do the masterclass? What are you going to blah, blah, blah. And so I went into that. So we hugged. She left. She's doing fantastic. Per everything, like when life lines up, like all of these things just started lining up for her and me that were, again, only happen when you are truly like in alignment with like the energy of the universe and like where you're supposed to be going next and all of that. And so I was like, okay, this is good. And I was excited to like, and so I started working full time, I'll say. When was it? Let's see, it's the end of July. I think like June 19th-ish. So 5-6 weeks ago. And, you know, I reorged my life pretty much. Anything that could be delegated got delegated. And I started adjusting more. And I loved it. It was really nice because I remembered how easy adjusting people is. How like being like, okay, you got to be there at 9:00, and then you're just adjusting people. Like, no, you're not responsible for sending emails and doing all this stuff. Like, you're adjusting. And it was like, oh, this is kind of nice. Well, who takes care of like that email to our accountant? Well, your husband does, because that's what, like, you don't have time. Well, who does that marketing thing? Well, your marketing person does now. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of nice. I just have to like adjust and make money. I am the talent. So it was great. And so we get like 2 weeks in, we get 3 weeks in, and all of a sudden, like post 4th of July, there is this shift that happens. And at first it starts with everyone else. And I just notice that all of my patients are a freaking wreck. Now I have a theory for this, and I can't speak to where you are. If you're in Texas or in New York or California, I don't know what your patients have been going through, but I can tell you here in Wisconsin, things got really bad in March and April. And then like May, we thought things were going to let up. They did. And then June comes and things continue to get looser. People who were isolating start feeling comfortable at least getting together, like for socially distancing outside. 4th of July is kind of this peak in our area, I will say, where there was like baseball tournaments and barbecues and like people on boats at sandbars and things like that. And I think there was this like things are returning, like, you know, it makes sense. Okay, started bad and is slowly getting better. But then anybody who's been in practice and sees kids knows that when you're on the other side of the 4th of July thing, all of a sudden everybody's brain turns towards the school year. People start going like, we're after the halfway. And so they can see like, oh gosh, we only have this many weeks of summer and then the school year. And I know this is not unique to Wisconsin, that the school year is going to be pretty effed up. And so we're starting to see like school districts talking about masks and maybe not even coming together at all and maybe doing virtual. And so all of a sudden we're going, wait a minute, we're moving backwards. We can't look to the fall 6 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, and assume that we're going to take the same velocity of opening up, of a returning to normal and apply it. We're actually, for the first time in this whole pandemic, starting to go backwards in our minds of like, wait a minute, you know, so like many states in the last week or two have gotten stricter. And there's this tension of uncertainty of like, oh crap, we're going backwards. So therefore, I don't know what the fall is going to look like because I don't know where this is going. So it started with my patients. So I started going like, oh my gosh, Mercury's in retrograde. Holy shit, we're all screwed. Oh, and then there's a full moon. And then I'm like, oh yeah, they're all freaking out because of this. And then like the next week I got my period and it was way more emotional than typical. but nothing I can't handle. I was just like, damn. Like, I woke up and I went out to get coffee, and Kirby's just like, whoa, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I got my period and I'm upset and sad. And he's like, oh, honey, and like, that's kind of normal on some months for like a day for me, or maybe 2 days. So, then I'm like blaming it on that. And it didn't go away. Just my period went away, but that feeling of sadness and not wanting to talk to anybody and being irritated at just the dumbest things and just wanting to eat and drink, it wasn't going away. And it actually, the next week, got way worse. And then the next week, so then we're like to like this week, got worse. And I was like, whoa, I'm dealing with legit anxiety again and borderline depression. Like, I've never been actually diagnosed with anxiety or depression. I will say there have been moments in life where I've had a lot of anxious thoughts, bad sleep, bad like self-care habits. I'm turning towards food and drink, and I'm wanting to pull away. And so I started to notice it, that some things that had happened back in March and April. So back in March and April, when things were kind of at their peak, I would have these moments away from patients. Usually when I'm with patients, I'm like in flow mode. It's all in the recovery time of like dinner or, whatever, where I will kind of, for no reason, I needed to like stop what I was doing and lie on the floor because like my heart was palpating oddly and I was feeling tightness in my chest. And so like that would happen back in March and April, like at dinner time with my family for no apparent reason. And so last week I noticed I was just ordering a sink for the new building, and I liked the sink. Like, yeah, finding the right sink because it has to be ADA was a pain in the ass because every sink I liked was not ADA. And I was like, all the ADA sinks are ugly. So anyway, so I'd found a sink that I really liked and was in stock and was a great price and clicked buy. There was no reason in my mind. And so all of a sudden I had to like lay down on the floor. And Curb was just like, I don't think this is PMS. And I'm like, yeah, I don't either. So you're kind of up to speed and, well, up to like last week. And I started, just doing research, and research is a fancy way to say I was just like Googling shit and scrolling and whatever. And divine intervention happens, and I come across this term called compassion fatigue. Now, every single person I've talked to since then knows exactly what compassion fatigue is, and I feel like I might be the only idiot who didn't know that this was a thing. You can kind of put two and two together pretty quickly as to like, I wonder what that is. But compassion fatigue, sometimes when you read a definition of it, it can be much more driven towards like EMTs and people who are experiencing literal trauma, literal deaths, car accidents. I've known for a long time that female veterinarians have the highest suicide rate of all healthcare professions. Like, what? And like, you can look it up. It's the truth. And I think that this is kind of at the root of it because they're having to euthanize animals and then like go on with their life. Like things are, so I'll define this for you though. So compassion fatigue, it's a broadly defined concept that can include emotional, physical, and spiritual distress in those providing care to another. It's associated with caregiving, where people or animals are experiencing significant emotional or physical pain and suffering. Now, I think that a big reason why I haven't experienced this term before this is if you guys look way back in the episodes, there's an episode on empathy that I do that I kind of joke how I might be a sociopath and I don't really carry a lot of empathy, but I am getting better. I think unfortunately, I'm getting more empathetic, which in that episode, I was talking to my friend Laura on it, and I was like, what's the point of this? This all sounds terrible. And she said, like, yeah, it is, but it's what humanity needs to move forward, is for all of us to have more empathy and love for each other. That's what we need as a society to move forward. And I'm like, oh, it sounds terrible. And she's like, yeah, it is. And you have to have boundaries around it. So anyways, my empathy project, that's what this damn podcast should be called. Not She Slays the Day. She just keeps getting more empathetic. The Empathy Project. So I think that why I didn't know it before is because I was still a really good doctor, but I didn't feel people's pain for them. Which is a boundary I think a lot of female healthcare providers don't set. I had a great boundary around that. I was good. I was a good doctor, and I could talk to someone about their stress, and then I could leave the room, and it did not attach to me. And now it does more, apparently, because I know I'm more empathetic. And so, yeah, that. The second reason that I think it kind of came up for me is I not just doubled the number of patients, but not tripled, 2.5-fold. I don't know what the number is. Some mathematician out there is like, you idiot, it's this. Anyways, I more than doubled the number of patients I was adjusting in a week during a really effed up month. Like I said, July, and what happened? We as a society started moving, quote unquote, backwards in our, I don't know if that quote unquote was necessary. We didn't literally move backwards. You know what I'm saying. We started to get more strict again, and people are looking to the school year and seeing it's not going to be normal. So anybody who's a healthcare provider knows that the month of July was cray-cray for people. And if you are a clinic that has up until now talked about stress. Oh, that's the other aspect I didn't tell you. We're, like many of you probably, a kind of weird chiropractic clinic. And I love that about us. We talk way beyond back pain. We have trained our patients that to think about stress in their life when they're experiencing physical ailments, so it's not a surprise that our patients, when they're experiencing this increased stress and burden, we've trained them to talk to us about that. So when they do just that, it's fantastic. But when it's like, oh, whoa, this is heavier shit and more of it, because normally we're not all in this together. Like in this pandemic, we're all experiencing the same thing, right? Like prior to this, I might have one patient who's like, oh my gosh, my mother's going into a nursing home, and like, oh, I need to be there for her. But then I go to the next person and they're like, oh, I got accepted to college. I'm so excited. I can't wait to leave. And then the next person got engaged and they're super excited, and we can talk about where they're getting married and all that stuff. And then maybe the next person is dealing with a lot of anxiety because they want to quit their job. But right now, we are all going through the same trauma together. So like every patient, there's not a single patient that I go to that I'm like, hey, how's it going? How's life? How's your summer? And they're like, oh, summer's great. I've got all this stuff. And like, I'm like, oh, are the kids excited to go back to school? Oh yeah, I'm so excited. Like nobody's doing that. Even on people's good days, they're like, yeah, I mean, we went camping this weekend. And I'll be like, oh, how was it? And they're like, weird. It was weird because, for X, Y, Z reasons. So we're seeing all this. And so why I wanted to talk and budge this to the front is I have a feeling, even though a lot of people listening may have not the exact same month or two that I've had, if you have, call me, let's get drinks. But going through this in some kind of way, and you might be going like, what is going on with me? And so we're going to talk about compassion fatigue. So this seems like a really good time to give a disclaimer that I am not a therapist, a counselor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a researcher on compassion fatigue. I'm just Lauryn, and I have Google, and I've listened to a couple TED Talks on compassion fatigue, and I have my experience. So please don't Please don't use this as like medical advice type of thing. So we talked about what it was by definition. Let's talk about what some of the symptoms are of compassion fatigue. And with anything, a lot of these are quote unquote vague things that could be covered by a lot. But if you're a healthcare provider to someone mentally or physically, and you're having this, you may want to think about stuff. So they break it down into like 3 different categories of symptoms. There's cognitive symptoms, physical symptoms, and behavioral symptoms. So cognitive is kind of that inability to shut things off, dwelling on the day. So this might look like you get home for dinner and you're thinking about that patient, that why isn't there that SI joint responding normal? Like, what am I doing wrong? So a lot of that goes into the next thing of like self-blame. I should be doing more. Maybe a patient quits care because they weren't getting results, and you dwell on that of like, damn it, I should have given them exercises. They needed more. It will then or can turn into more global changes in belief systems. So this might look like, so it starts with, I'm not getting results, to does chiropractic even help that? Should I even be talking about that category? Or, it's just much more global assessments. It turns past you into like, do I even have any friends? Like, it's just these much bigger, like, belief systems in life. Then, kind of reducing your sense of personal or occupational accomplishment. Again, similar, like, is chiropractic... I know everybody else gets results in chiropractic with anxiety, but like, I sure as shit am not. I can't even, like, I'm experiencing anxiety. What's wrong with me? And then just like that difficulty concentrating, focusing, making decisions. Every decision seems like this big thing. You're kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. So then there's the physical symptoms. And this can be things like nausea, IBS. So I told you that, oh no, I didn't tell you guys this. Yeah. So in July, the beginning of July, around the time where I said my patients were starting to get broken down, but I wasn't, I was getting terrible stomach aches in the morning, like gut wrenching, like, oh my God, am I going to be able to go to work? I have to go to work. I'm down a dock, like stomach aches, and they would go away. And this wasn't the first time in my life that I've had an essence of IBS. I had it like 2 summers ago, really bad for a month. But anyway, so I was like, you might have dizziness. You might be getting headaches. Might be having a hard time sleeping. Nightmares, but you're just tense and on edge. So some of those physical symptoms. And then the behavioral symptoms that they call out are self-isolation and withdrawal. So this is what started to happen with me, where I was like, oh, this is a red flag. Like the stomach aches, I'm like, I've been there. But when I literally was like, I don't want to go to lunch with my friend. I don't want to talk with my friend. I don't want to go do that thing. Like I really was struggling and isolating and starting to withdraw. Now I think I don't want to say I catch things really like faster than normal people. What I will say is I take action a lot faster. So I notice that behavior in me and immediately go, okay, hold up, we need to do something here. Whereas other people might just go like, oh, well, we'll see if this gets better on its own. So that's the only area where I feel like I am slightly different, is I am aware of my triggers and warning signs and go, that's not normal. Like some of these other things are normal. And then when it gets to those red flags, I'm like, no. Other behavioral things are like self-medicating, increasing substance use, So that would be one of my yellow flags where I'm like, well, I'm drinking a little too much, but aren't we all? Like wine o'clock. And just conflicts in relationships. I noticed that I had basically a sense of paranoia is the only way I can describe it, of like that friend didn't text me back, or they gave me a thumbs up. They're mad at me. Oh my God, they're mad at me. And like just seeing a picture of like, you know, two people golfing. Why didn't I get invited? I mean, never mind the fact that they golfed at 11 o'clock on Monday and they're good friends. And they know that I now work at 11 o'clock on Monday and don't have that flexibility in my schedule. But like just seriously, that kind of paranoia of like, they don't like me. So I was like, okay, so this isn't working, Lauryn. So those are some of those symptoms of compassion fatigue. And, you know, outbursts, it's a them versus us mentality, just kind of this veil of sadness. And then the physical ailments too, like I touched on it with like the nausea and the IBS, those more obvious ones, but just like I felt like my body wasn't holding an adjustment as well, right? Like I could tell like I was just achier. And we as chiropractors know why this happens, like duh. So why does compassion fatigue happen? I don't know. I have a lot of theories. There are a lot of theories. I think if I can talk straight to chiropractors in like a shorthand, we understand the neurology of this, adrenal fatigue, caring for others. If we incorporate Enneagram into this, if we incorporate like feminine energy. So I guess I shouldn't say I don't know. I think I can say I think it's complicated and depends on everyone. If your personality is really geared towards caring for others, that's going to be a big one. If you're in healthcare and you're literally in a role, you've put yourself in a role where your job is to receive people's burdens so you can help them, I think you're kind, you know, that's, you're going to absorb it. You know, if you don't have those good outlets, like we know, why does it happen? Like, come on, look at your life and how you're prioritizing other people and their mental and physical health. And literally we're touching people. So there's a transaction. There is an energetic transaction that is happening when we do an adjustment. Like, oh, can we just step on a philosophical soapbox just for a minute of what is happening when you are doing an adjustment? We are doing so much more than popping a bone back in place, right? Somebody's Uncle Joe can push on a back and like make popping noises and not be a chiropractor. We know the well, there's a whole bunch of differences there anyways. But like one of the differences is we're clearing the nervous system. We are restoring communication in a specific way and clearing that stress at that vertebrae. Where do you think the stress goes, people? Like, if we're clearing it from them, should I give you a minute to catch up? Like, we're physically working on people. So unless we have these ways of getting rid of it, unless you have clearing patterns for your energy, you're just lining yourself up for this. Now, I'm not going to touch on this. I'm going to say it, but I'm not going to go a deep dive here. But like when you start researching compassion fatigue, there's a huge element of childhood development and trauma, what they call it. So here's why I'm not going to like do a deep dive. I'm not saying it's not true, but I will say that my belief is that parents and childhood get blamed for a lot of things. And I think that it doesn't mean it's not there as an explanation, but I think that you can have trauma as a kid that never had to, like if your parents did everything to protect you, your traumas are going to be that you never had to suffer. And like your parents didn't teach you, they handed you everything and they didn't teach you that suffering was important. No, I don't want to call it a trauma. That is your development. And does therapy need to work through that? Yeah, absolutely. But then the case here for compassion fatigue is more that opposite of like you had a false sense of responsibility and caring early in childhood. And so you carry that into your adultness. So it is what it is. For those that really touches on something, go talk to a therapist on your childhood. But I'm not that, so we're gonna move on. So another big reason this happens is that lack of boundaries. That's a big one. We know this, but that's kind of the silver thread through everything. We don't have the clearing boundaries for when we adjust people. We don't have the emotional boundaries to not take on their things, like, how to listen to someone's story and give them advice, but then not be attached to whether they get the results or whether they do the advice. So boundaries within our profession, if you're in any kind of profession of healthcare, are a big one. We could have a whole episode on boundaries. I'm not going to. I'm just going to say, check your boundaries also. So either check your childhood, check your boundaries, and check your general self-care. But let's talk about what are some things you can do about it, actually, okay? So here, I'm just going to remind you, just in case you fast forward to the previous disclaimer, I am not a psychologist, counselor, therapist, researcher on compassion fatigue. I'm just Lauryn. I'm a chiropractor, and these are some things that work for me. These are some things that work for my patients. Some of them are controversial, I will say that. But I don't know, take what works for you. I did not put them in order because of like severity. So they're kind of like, one might be really like, whoa, that's a big one. And then the other one might be like, oh, and that's kind of fun. Just because I didn't want to give any kind of impression that these are the steps you should go through, because I don't know you and what. So as you listen, probably one or two are going to pop out as really important to you. So the first thing that I do when I start to get those warning signs are check my fluids. My pattern is that when I start getting stressed, I will drink coffee all day and then drink like the smallest amount of water. Like we're talking less than 1 cup, and then get home and drink wine and go to cocktails. And then the next morning I am super fatigued, because I'm dehydrated. And so then what do? I need to drink more coffee, and then I get super ramped up and stimulated artificially from caffeine. And so then what do I need to do after work? I need to chill the F out. So so that is my cycle. And then like occasionally I'll throw a pre-workout in there too, which is just caffeine. So that's a big thing that I need to do in making sure, I don't typically do severe things like, all right, you're going to do a caffeine withdrawal and you're not going to do caffeine at all. But I just focus on the increase of water. Okay. So like, I like to approach myself gently. Well, that's not true. My nature is to approach myself very aggressively and full of shame and all of that. In my work with other women, I tell them to handle themselves gracefully. So therefore I am working on doing that too. So what works for me is not to focus on like, okay, you are only allowed this much coffee and you're not going to drink until 8 p.m. and you're only allowed 1. What works for me is to go like, hey, drink as much coffee as you need, but you need to get the water in. You got to do the stuff. So that's 1. Step 2 is talk to someone, paid or not, professional or not. If you're paying them, maybe they should be a professional, though. I will just say that. Here's a controversial statement, and I have chiropractic coaches that listen to this. Don't oh God, I feel bad saying this, but I'm going to say it. This is my opinion. Don't put that on your chiropractic coach to be your therapist. It's okay to share with them. And like many of the women who are mentors and coaches, they want an element of that. And if you take them there, they will be there for you because that is their programming and they feel that they need to do that. But I will say that they're your chiropractic coach or, whatever. And it's important to let them know like, hey, this is what I'm going through. I'm thinking that maybe I should sign up for therapy, and they'll probably coach you in that of going like, I think that'd be a really good idea. But what so many of us are like, I'm already paying for a coach. And she says she's like, not just my practice coach, but my mindset coach. Don't put that on them. Okay. Like, I'm sorry to the coaches who are listening. If you're like, no, I want to also be their therapist for their marriage and also be their therapist. Like, okay. Hope you're charging a lot. So you can do just traditional therapy, or you can go to betterhelp.com. This is not a paid advertisement for them. It's just somewhere I went and filled out a really, really long, what's it called? Application or whatever, talking about all the area, what's going on with me, what are important aspects to talk, like, do I care if she's a female? Do I care if she cares, blah, 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 blah. And so, that's $65 a week. You get a virtual session, which you can do on the phone or video, and then you get like texting and messaging happening also. So if you're not there, cool, but just know that's what I would recommend is getting some professional help if you start to see some red flags. So something I haven't done yet because I'm wimping out on finances is getting my hormones checked. So I don't have really good insurance. Because I'm a chiropractor and my husband works for our clinic, so he doesn't have a corporate job. Anyway, so if you go back and listen to the episode with Beth Westy, Dr. Beth Westy, I don't know the number, but her name's in the title. It's about hormones and whether they are affecting your life. And it's pretty clear in my conversation with her that you're like, oh, Lauryn, I think you might. Yeah. So nothing has changed because I have cheaped out. She talks about the Dutch test. That is just one way in order to get your hormones checked. You can get them checked a whole bunch of ways. But you might want to check how your estrogen and your cortisol and your progesterone are doing, because if you've been running a system of stress mode for a long time and it feels like you're PMSing 30 days out of the month, might be just time, okay? So again, you might not be there yet because I think the Dutch test is like $700, and I was like, oh, I don't want to spend that much yet. So I haven't taken that step yet, but it's like one of that like naggy things in the back of my head that I'm like, oh, I really should. So I applaud you if you're like, I'm going to do that because that sounds good. And honestly, I don't know why, because like I think I would help lose weight. I think I would sleep better, whatever. Anyways, okay, so do you need some medicinal help? So this can be something as simple as supplements. So in our clinic, I think we get them through Emerson Ecologics. We use like these 3 supplements. Disclaimer, again, I'm not your doctor. I don't know who you are, but we use something called Lavella, which is organic, medical grade, not medical grade, whatever. You can take it orally, lavender, which is really great. And then we use something called HPA Adapt, and then something called cortisol calm. So that's kind of where we start with our patients and ourselves of like, I'm feeling a little stressed. I don't feel like I'm processing stress super well despite getting adjusted. So we start there. I, in this season of the pandemic, have started taking CBD more seriously. Up until March and April, I was kind of like, yeah, sure, I don't know. My thought, listen, again, all of this stuff is controversial because somebody out there hates CBD and somebody out there loves CBD, whatever. I am always hesitant or skeptical. I'm just a naturally skeptical person. So anytime that somebody is like, oh, CBD cures this. CBD cures everything. It is the greatest thing under the sun. It can help you lose weight. I'm like, okay, you lost me. Now I don't trust you at all. And then I shut down. So up until March, April, when I was having mini panic attacks, I was like, I don't need it, whatever. So then I started talking to my acupuncturist about, I was like, well, like if I was going to do it, what would be the dosing? It's really hard to find a dosing for CBD online because of research being all over the place on it. I'm going to tell you what dosing I use. And I hesitate to do this because but I don't know. This is what I have found has worked for me. A dose between 40 to 100 milligrams a day. Usually if I do 100, I split it up throughout the day. Okay, so you do you. But for those of you who are like, I'm doing CBD, a lot of CBD doses are like 10 milligrams. So if you're dealing with more than just like, I just need a little something to calm down. Like if you're dealing with some of these more severe symptoms, you may just want to like do your research and talk to somebody who knows way more about CBD than me and find what kind of a dosing you could or should be doing. Just a thought. Okay, now here's the real controversial one. Please don't throw stones at me. I know I'm a chiropractor and I know I signed in blood to hate all pharmaceuticals at all times, forever and ever, with zero exceptions. But for those that are at a point where they are having full-blown panic attacks, where it is interfering with your work, where you are neglecting your children, where you are having a hard time getting out of bed and feeling motivated by anything despite loving your job. If you're there, can I just be a chiropractor in your life saying, it's okay. It's okay for you to talk to a medical doctor about a medical grade solution. Do I want you to be aware that there are lots of side effects? I think you know that. I think we have enough talking heads in our lives saying that pharmaceuticals are the devil and they will kill you and they actually make the problem worse. Like, I get that. I get what they do to the neurology. I know that. Like, but listen, I would rather have you go there temporarily. And once you get to a better state of mind, start making some non-medical changes in your life. So hopefully you can wean off it as fast as possible. But whatever, okay? Send me my hate mail. I don't care. Okay, so next is your self-care routine. This is a whole nother thing that could be a whole nother podcast on self-care routines. Here's my point that I'm going to say on it. You don't need me to talk too much. I will say that I am the master of a micromanaged day. So when I do self-care, so like I work out 5 times a week. I get my nails done. I get massages. I get acupuncture. I do the stuff that by definition should be self-care. What I have found for me is that I will say like, okay, so I wake up at 6 o'clock and I do this and then I meditate and then I have to journal and then I get ready for work and then I go to work and then on my lunch break, I eat a salad because that is fueling my body and I take my vitamins and then I go work out and then I go back to work and I care for people and then I go for a walk with my family. Like, I am just a master of turning self-care into somehow still being a fight or flight thing I need to do. So for me, what I have found is like, I don't count any of that as self-care. I count that as like necessary for my beauty and physical body. So like a run can be self-care for me sometimes, but sometimes a run is just a run because that's what I'm training for. I'm training for a half, or like I'm trying to drop a pound or 2, like whatever. So I don't get, like, I just have to realize that sometimes a run is just a run and it's not self-care. Sometimes a massage is for tight muscles and not my mentality because that's what I do to it. Sometimes it does have better self-care effects. But what I need unscheduled time to not have an agenda, to spend with myself and to not have a checklist. And this might just be my personality. This might not be like for other people, but I It's what I do is like I turn a run into accomplishing things. And then it becomes more than just self-care and it becomes an issue. So there's this French term called flâneur. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it's basically this French term of like aimlessly exploring. You are intentionally being aimless. I think an American term for it would be like meandering or something like that. But yeah, it's just having time with no thought of just like, what will I do with this time? And you can choose what to do that feels good in that moment. So I think that is an aspect of self-care that isn't talked about enough that I think needs to be in your life. Okay. So the next one, crystals. I don't know how much you guys know my opinion on crystals. I think they're pretty. I think that I don't know if God has given crystals any powers over humans, but I know as long as I don't start worshiping the crystal instead of God, there's very little harm in having pretty rocks around. So there are some crystals that are specifically for absorbing energies. So anything dark and black, or like just like the darker colors, like I think like tourmaline is for absorbing negative energy. So like they say, putting tourmaline like over like by your front door or in your rooms, but around your patients basically to absorb their negative baggage that they bring in. And then they encourage things like purple amethyst for being a grounding thing. So basically, I don't really know how it's different than black tourmaline, but like that's supposed to like help you not absorb their energy. It's like grounding and it helps. And then there's like things like white quartz, which helps clear negative energy. I don't know. It's fun. They're pretty. If that's not for you, I don't care. I wouldn't hang my hat on it. If you're having suicidal thoughts, though, maybe do more than the rocks. Just gonna say that. I don't know. Maybe not. Whatever. Okay, get some empathetic discernment is the next one. Empathetic discernment is a term for understanding yourself and learn what hurts you. So I kind of said that I started getting to a point of paranoia of like I would see pictures of my friends getting together and start telling myself a story that they don't like me. So that is empathetic discernment, is going like, maybe you shouldn't spend so much time on social media. Like knowing what triggers you, what you're listening to, what you're reading, what you're exposing yourself to that hurts you. Things that people say, it might be, you might need to cut off talking about the mask debate in your clinic. Now, you don't have to be a jerk, but you can learn ways to quickly change the subject. If talking about the pandemic and masking in the school year is causing you harm, have a rule that you don't bring it up. Like some of us are so glutton for punishment, where it's just like, I found that I was bringing it up with patients where it's like, well, geez Louise, like figure out different table talk. My God. Anyway, so have some empathetic discernment. Second to last is just the idea of gratitude and mindfulness. I'm not going to talk about this that much, not because I don't think it's good. I just don't have anything unique or original to say on it. It's not going away. And here's maybe my unique thought on it. If when I say practice of gratitude and mindfulness, you roll your eyes and go, I've heard that before. Most truth in life gets repeated over and over. So it's not because it's unoriginal, it's because it is so true. So research just keeps finding more and more power around this idea. So if you don't have a gratitude or mindfulness exercise in your daily life, can you just start somehow, please read an article, read a damn book, do something for 5 minutes, start small. That's my aim. So then the last thing that I will say comes up as important around being a healthcare provider and compassion fatigue is more than likely you are taking on a role that God has not asked you to do. Spirituality of any kind, okay, whatever. Having spirituality around this, I don't know if any of you have heard me talk about how much I hate the damn cup analogy of like, we must pour from our cup and then refill our cup. I hate this analogy because a cup is all about us. It's all about my energy into you. And you can see that when we view it from that standpoint, it is very easy to get depleted. What I will say is I would much rather, instead of thinking of ourselves as a cup, I would much rather think of ourselves as a straw, okay? A straw that is tapped into an endless amount of love and energy. For you, that can be God. For you, that can be innate intelligence. For you, that can be source, whatever it is for you. You, Jennifer, Sarah, whatever, like, you are not an endless amount of energy. You have a very finite amount of energy, actually. And so, as a healthcare provider, if you are trying to take on too much with your patients, you better have a really good system in place of how you're going to refill your cup, because that shit is going to get emptier by the hour. If you can set up boundaries and remind yourself that you're not doing the healing, you're not doing the fixing, you are a conduit, you are a straw of information from an endless source of love and healing to them. You plant the seeds, but it's on them to do the work. If you can learn how to detach like that, you are going to find yourself with a bounty of energy. Now, to end how we started, I haven't figured that out yet. I haven't mastered it. If anybody's heard my chiropractic story, you know that I went into this profession because from an ego state of I wanted to be the fixer in everybody's life. So this is a daily reminder for myself that I was positioned here to be the conduit for patients, to connect them to their endless healing, to restore communication for them to heal themselves, to connect them with energy, but not to be their energy. So, like I said, I'm working on it. A lot of these I am working on, and I am not perfect, but I've made positive steps in the last week, and I'll say I'm feeling a lot better. I haven't had a panic attack in like 8 days now. And I don't know, it might come back. It probably will. Like, if you look at life as a long thing, of course it will. I have not to think that I've mastered this concept when we're so perfectly put in a position for compassion fatigue to creep back in. Like, it's going to come back, but these are the steps that I will return to when I start seeing my red flags. And I hope this helps you. I hope that this brings awareness to a topic that maybe you didn't know was a thing and you were wondering what was wrong with you. And I hope that some of the steps that I've given on what you can do will work for you. And I don't think you have to do all of them. It's okay if you're like morally and philosophically opposed to some of them. That's okay. That sounds good. Try something else. So we will return to our previously scheduled podcast episodes next week. This one I just budged in front. So I love you guys. Reach out. Know that you are not going through this alone. and that I'm here for you to just be raw and honest and vulnerable. And if this episode did something for you in any way, I would love if you would shoot me a DM, write a review for the episode or for the podcast. I would just love it. It helps bring the message to more people to have these open and vulnerable conversations. All right. Have a great week.